People are not tired of work. They are tired of being managed by people who forget that they're human. We're tired of being measured but not heard, tired of being told to be resilient in systems that keep draining us. We're tired of leaders asking for trust while giving them very little clarity, very little consistency, and frankly, very little care. And this is what I think one of the biggest leaderships happening right now. People are tired of being managed and they want to be led. And there is a difference, a big difference. Management might say things like, "Did you get the task done?" Where leadership asks, what conditions help people do meaningful work well? Management focuses on compliance, leadership builds commitment. And while management tracks activity, leadership builds trust. And if we really want workplaces with stronger teams, better service delivery, and more sustainable organizations, we have to stop confusing management with leadership. Welcome back to Mindful Management. I'm Shenandoah Chefalo, and today I want to talk about something I think every leader, supervisor, executive, director, team member is feeling right now, even if they don't have the language for it yet. People are exhausted by leadership that feels transactional. They're not looking for another slogan about culture, another poster about values. They don't want another meeting where someone says, "We care about people," and then design the workplace in a way that proves quite the opposite. And I want to be clear, this isn't about blaming leaders or people in charge. Most leaders I work with are also exhausted. Many are under-resourced, overwhelmed, and trying to hold together systems that are changing faster than they can even stabilize. But this is exactly why we need to talk about this, because most organizations do not have a motivation problem. And this isn't about the intergenerational working together in the workplace either, because what we really have is a trust problem, a clarity problem, a communication problem, and it's a human-centered leadership problem. And oftentimes when we feel like we have problems, what we think is we need more control, we need more systems. But here's the thing, the answer isn't more control. The answer is a shift in leadership. And so this is something I've been thinking about for a really long time and been trying to put words to for probably 3 or 4 years, because there's a difference between managing and leading. And so let's just start with the difference. Management is not bad. We need management. There is a place for management. We need it. We need schedules, systems, budgets, policies. We need to have deadlines and accountability. But management alone does not create culture. Management can tell people what to do. Leadership helps people understand why that matters. Management can track performance. Leadership creates the conditions for performance to be sustainable. And while management can enforce a policy, leadership asks whether the policy is helping or harming the humans inside of the system. So here's the simplest way I can say it. Management is about task. Leadership is about conditions. And when conditions are poor, performance will eventually suffer. I've seen this in government agencies, schools, human service organizations, nonprofits, teams who do incredibly hard and important community work. The issue is not always that people do not care. In fact, in many of the systems I go to, the people care very deeply. Often is that deep care, right? The conditions around them are making it impossible to keep caring in a healthy way. So when leaders say things like, people just don't want to work anymore, I have to gently push back and challenge that. Maybe people don't want to work in cultures where they feel invisible. Maybe people don't want to keep absorbing chaos that leaders refuse to name or take responsibility for. Maybe people don't want to perform loyalty in environments that have not earned their trust. So I just want you to think about that for a moment because I've walked into organizations where leaders truly believed things were fine because people were quiet. No one was complaining. There was no pushback. No one raising concerns in meetings. And when I would ask questions like, is this because people feel safe or because they've learned it's not worth speaking? See, those are two very different things. I'm sort of often reminded of this story in one of my very first group coaching sessions where we were going through an activity and a person wrote down on their paper that they wanted to see a tiger. And I asked the question, are you sure? Right? There's two ways in which you could see a tiger potentially from a very safe viewing distance, maybe in a car on a safari, or while it's chasing you through the jungle. And so understanding that silence is not always buy-in, that sometimes silence is survival. I have seen teams where staff had brilliant ideas, but they stopped offering those because every idea was met with defensiveness. I've seen supervisors say, my team never tells me anything. We ask, we send surveys, we do all of these things. But also they're interrupting, dismissing, or minimizing every hard thing the team has tried to say. I've seen employees who look disengaged on the outside, but when given one safe conversation, they had pages of insight, grief, frustration, and hope that they'd been carrying alone. Now, as an outside consultant, I often get to see this. An employee who's desperate to say, hey, I think I know what the elephant in the room is. Can I share it with you? Can you try to bring it up? So here's the leadership truth. If people stop bringing you problems, it's not a time to celebrate. It might be the time to ask, have they stopped trusting me? A quiet team is not always a healthy team. A compliant team is not always a committed team. And a busy team is not always a well team. So if you're just looking over your folks right now, if you're wondering, what's really happening, then here's some things that might tell you that your people are being managed and not led. Let's talk about the 3 signs of that, right? Of management versus leadership. Now, again, we need both. But sign number 1, people only hear from leadership when something is wrong. If the only time someone hears your voice is when there's a correction, a crisis, a deadline, they will start associating leadership with threat. And it's almost unintentional. We're unaware that we're even doing it, right? It's unconscious to us. And that doesn't build accountability, it builds anxiety. Human-centered leaders build connection before correction, and they don't wait until something breaks to show up, right? Celebration has a place here. So a simple shift sounds something like, I want to check in before this becomes urgent. What's working? What's getting in the way? What support would make the biggest difference for you? That's leadership, right? Moments of like, what do you need before the thing is at the 11th hour and we've got to just get it done and everyone is in chaos. What's in the way? What's stopping you from moving forward on these things, right? How can we support? Leadership's about removing barriers. Sign number 2 that you might have more management than leadership is that change keeps happening to people, but not with people. And this is a big one, and it was hard for me to begin recognizing this when I was working with clients, is that people do not resist change. They resist being changed without voice, choice, and context. When leaders roll out changes without explanation, The truth is our brains fill in the blanks and the staff will fill in the blanks. And the blanks are rarely generous because our brain is trying to protect us, right? This is why the neuroscience of trauma is so, so important to understand for leaders. Our brain is always trying to keep us safe. And so when it doesn't have all the information, it makes its best guess, and it's usually planning for worst case scenario. So we wonder, what are they not telling us? Did anyone think about how this impacts us? They wonder, are we safe? So a trauma-informed and human-centered leader does not have to have every answer, but they do need to communicate what they know, what they do not know, what's being decided, and how many people will be included. This often comes up when we talk about transparency, and leaders say things like, oh, well, we can't say why X, Y, and Z happened. It's confidential. Or tell people that. Tell people that a piece of information cannot be shared, but that you've looked at it from all these angles, that these are the people you've reached out to and who you've included. You might even think about this script. Here's what we know right now. Here's what we're still working through. Here's what will change immediately. Here is what will not change yet. And here's how we're going to gather feedback before the next decision. If you can just think about that script, you will help eliminate the staff filling in those blanks to keep themselves safe. That one script can lower anxiety. That one script can help you move forward in a really intentional way. So sign number 3 about more management versus leadership is performance is discussed without context. Right? If someone is missing deadlines, making mistakes, withdrawing, or seemingly less engaged, yes, we need accountability, but it's also a great time to have curiosity. So not excuse making, not rescuing, for those of you who are familiar with the reenactment triangle, but pure curiosity. There's a difference between asking, what's wrong with you? Why aren't you doing these things? And asking, what's getting in the way? One creates shame, the other gives you information. And leaders need information if they want to solve the right problem. It's a piece that I can't talk about enough, that often leaders are trying to solve problems, right? Our hearts are in the right place, but we're solving the wrong problems because we haven't been curious to see what's behind that. And by the way, this is especially true if that person missing deadlines and making mistakes and withdrawing has been with you a long time and they're really competent at their position, but you've seen a shift. Something's happening. And if you don't ask questions and the right questions and get curious about what that's about, you can miss really serious problems. And so that's why I wanted to do this podcast, this idea about how do we make a human-centered leadership reset? What do we do instead? So replace control with clarity. Right? Control says, do it because I said so. Clarity says, here's the outcome, here's the reason, here are the boundaries, and here's where you have choice. And I've seen this with some of my own staff in the past of like, no, I want to do this. I don't care how we get there. I just want, here's the outcome. Here's why I want this to be the outcome. Here's our budget, like, right? I want to try to increase our social media reach, but we've got a $500 budget. What are we going to do? And what does that look like? People do not need to be controlled to do good work. They need to understand what matters and where they have agency. We have to let go of that control of like, it has to look this way because this is the way I've done it for 20 years and you have to do it exactly the same and replicate it exactly the same. Where can we give people choice? Number 2, can you replace urgency with prioritization. I say this a lot in trainings. Everything cannot be urgent. And the truth for most of us is very little is life or death. Now, there are positions. I go into many government agencies. I go into many nonprofits where life and death is on the table. And some things are urgent. But I'm going to tell you that email, likely the meeting is not, right? And when everything is urgent, nothing is clear. And when nothing is clear, then even the most committed people burn themselves out trying to make everything matter equally. So we have to begin to understand the difference between urgent and important. If you're listening to this podcast, I am positive you do important work. But not everything is urgent. Not everything has to be handled this moment. And so a leader script to think about is we cannot do all of this at the same level at the same time. So let's name the top priority, what can wait, and what are we intentionally pausing? Right? This happens for me all the time. I'm spinning lots of plates. I'm trying to record a podcast. I'm writing a book. I'm creating a new course. And I have clients where we're doing training in real time and consultation. All of these things. They can't all be done at once. So I have to look at it literally every day for myself and say, okay, what's the priority today? What can wait until tomorrow? And what am I intentionally pausing until one of these two things gets done? And then I'll bring that back in, and then I'll rotate that plate around. It's not about lowering expectation, but it is the responsibility of leadership to begin prioritizing what needs to happen first, second, third. We can't make everything urgent, and we can't get it all done. It's just not going to happen. So number 3 is replacing performance pressure with sustainable support. You cannot ask people to be resilient in systems that are actively draining them. Resilience is not the ability to tolerate dysfunction forever. Resilience is the ability to recover, adapt, and stay connected to purpose with the right supports in place. We can't just keep asking people to roll with the punches day in and day out and never give them time to recover and never give them the supports that they need. So leaders have to ask things like, are we designing work in a way that people can actually sustain? Are we listening before people leave? Are we noticing when reliable people are quietly carrying too much? What's happening with the person that you always go to because they always say yes, they can take on that thing? And are you rewarding over-functioning and calling it commitment? Because the best employees are exhausted. And it's not just a wellness issue, it's leadership design issues. All the pizza parties in the world cannot save you. And by the way, I think you should have more pizza parties. You should have fun. You should have connection. You should have the ability to recover. But I've also watched those pizza parties be like, oh, grab a slice and go back and keep working. Right? You have to design it so that there can be recovery time and that we can stay connected to why we're doing the work in the first place. So I think it gets confusing when you're in the work because you're going day to day. Leaders are trying to manage all these things. They're trying to prioritize for multiple people in multiple directions, and everything does seem urgent. And we can get into our hypervigilance, that fight, flight, freeze, appease. And so one of the things I wanted to do on this podcast was come up with scripts with things people could say. Now, you don't need to memorize them, and they don't need to be word for word. But this idea of like, how you could start working this into your language to shift. Because remember, it's small, consistent shifts that really get us there. There's not just one magic pill and we're all done. So I wanted to make it super practical for you. And know that like these scripts do not replace leadership. They just help leaders practice when the pressure's high. When you know you're going to go back to that old way of doing the work, it's like, can I revisit these? Okay. So here's 5. I wrote 5 of them. So number 1, when someone is feeling overwhelmed, say it, name it, tame it. I notice that this feels heavy. Let's pause and look at what's most important right now. If you're giving more and more things to do, balance that. Balance that management part with this is a lot. Let's pause. Let's prioritize. Script 2, when priorities are unclear, say something like, before we move forward, let's clarify what success looks like, what matters most, what can wait. Help people. When someone brings you a concern, and I've watched this a lot, this especially happens when I'm doing our 3-day foundational in person, and we've kind of been working through some things and people are learning some new tools and thinking about things pretty deeply because they've had that space to step away from their day-to-day task. And someone in the room is going to name something. They're going to bring up a concern. And I've watched other leaders want to shut that down immediately. But what happens if we say something like, thanks for naming that. I don't have the answer yet, but I want to understand it fully before we move past it. Can you tell me more? Now, maybe the training's not the place to have that conversation, but it's, can you tell me more? Can we set up a time after this training to talk about it, right? Or if they're just bringing it up in a staff meeting or in a one-on-one with you, hey, I don't know. Tell me more. Be curious, right? The other piece is sometimes people say, well, trauma-informed means everybody could just use that as an excuse. Actually, trauma-informed and human-centered is about having accountability, because that's a really big piece of being trauma-informed and of being human-centered. So sometimes accountability is needed. How do we hold that in a trauma-informed, human-centered leadership perspective? So we might say something like, that did not meet expectations, and I want to address it clearly. Let's talk about what happened, what I need to change, and what support's needed so it doesn't continue. Right? Maybe that report wasn't what we needed, or it didn't turn out the way we expected. We can clarify that. We can be clear on that. The other thing that I think leaders struggle with is repair. When trust has been damaged, when safety is in question. So something really simple. I realize this decision impacted you. I want to acknowledge it, explain what I can, and hear what this has brought up for you or your team. We make mistakes. We have to be able to own them, hear other people out, and then find a way to move forward. Now, these are not magic sentences. They're just practice sentences. They're scripts to help you think about, how could I say this in a different way? They don't replace leadership. They're, again, just there to help you practice when pressure's high. That when someone says, hey, this new policy isn't working, it's easy to get into defensive mode, into your fight, flight, freeze. How can you shift that? How can you pause? Ask a question. Things that we can do. So before I close, I wanted to name a few common mistakes. I see this happen. And, I say mistakes not to like shame people or guilt people. Like, we do things unintentionally and intentionally all the time. And so one thing that I see happening is confusing availability with support. I hear leaders say, my door's always open. Okay, being available all the time is not the same as being helpful. Sometimes leaders are very accessible, but they're not clear. or they're constantly present, but they're still emotionally unsafe. So I don't want you to confuse access with trust. Just because people can reach you does not mean they feel safe with you. And I think this is a big one. And I see it. One of the things I try to practice with my folks is almost everybody I know will say, I'm safe. Anybody can come to me with anything. How do I know that? How do you show that you're safe, right? What are the things that you do? So just being available doesn't make you safe. Mistake number 2 is asking for feedback and then punishing honesty. If you ask people to be honest, then get defensive when they are, you have taught them, don't ever do that again. So you have to, if you really want people to tell you, you have to be willing to hear. And by the way, you may completely disagree with the feedback they're giving, but you have to hear it. If you ask for it, you have to hear it, you have to acknowledge it, and you have to get curious about it. If someone is offering feedback that you completely disagree with, instead of shutting it down, instead of getting defensive, ask a question. What makes you feel that way? Why do you say that? Tell me more, right? You have to get more information because there's something you're missing. Mistake number 3, and I debated whether I was going to include this one or not, to be perfectly honest with you, but lots of times I hear people calling people resistant when they're actually just underinformed. So before you label someone difficult, ask yourself, did we give enough context? Did we allow voice? Did we clarify the why? Did we create space for concerns? Sometimes resistance isn't defiance. Sometimes resistance is information. And if you shut it down too quickly, if you just brush it off as they're always difficult, you can miss something that could be really helpful in moving forward. Now, it's true that when it comes to change, most people are resistant. We say we want change, but the truth is I want you to change. I don't want to change. And so understanding and balancing those two things is important. But before you say, oh, that department never, they always do this. Before you get into that, just did we hear? Is there something they're trying to tell us by their resistance? Let's get curious about why they seem so resistant or what's happened. Maybe we have some repair work that we need to do. So here's what I want to leave you with. People are tired of being managed like tasks. They want to be led like the humans they are. And what I think all of us want is clarity, consistency, honesty. We want leaders who can tell the truth without causing us unnecessary harm. We want accountability that does not erase compassion. And we want compassion that doesn't erase accountability. Those two things can live. That's embracing the paradox. Two things can be true at the same time. The future of leadership is not control. It's trust. And trust is built in the daily moments, the follow through, the repair, the clear expectation, the honest conversation, the pause before the reaction, the willingness to listen before defending. That's where culture changes. And all of us have the ability to do that. It's not slogans and posters and all staff emails. In the way people experience leadership every day. So I hope something here today was helpful to you, that there's just that little shift you could make, a little piece of curiosity that you might ask in the next meeting you walk into. Until next time, stay mindful, stay human, keep leading like it matters because it does. And as I always say, take what you need, try something new, and tell somebody else. Thank you so much.